When I was growing up, I was really into video games, probably from the youngest age of anyone I know. I played the Sega Dreamcast at 2 years old. It's probably the oldest memory that I have. When I remember back to those memories from that age, I see them more vividly than even some things from when I was 3 or 4, simply because the experience of playing Sonic Adventure and Seaman and Worms was so special to me at the time. Obviously, I wasn't very good at it, but something about those games were profoundly important to me. Maybe it was because my brain was just starting to hatch at the time, and I just started having some of the executive functions enough to control a controller, or maybe it was the bright and beautiful colors illuminating from this very large box in my room. But whatever it was there, and it was very real. And when, we had all of these Dreamcast games sprawled out on the floor, we had these magazines that I would look through, didn't know how to read them, but all of these games were bought after the system had been defunct. Now, I was born in 2002, and so around that point, the Dreamcast had fallen out of fashion. It wasn't really being distributed anymore. And so all of the games became super, super cheap. This used to happen pretty much every time a console got old. I even remember it happening with the GameCube. It makes me kind of sad that it doesn't happen as much with consoles nowadays, is that the games become super, super fucking cheap. And what happened was that my dad had the Dreamcast since it came out, but he found these sales, and so he just bought shit tons and shit tons of games. And so I still have a lot of these games that have, like, the $2 price tag on them from what would have been GameStop at the time. It was Babbage's and these types of stores that don't exist anymore. GameStop bought them up, but CD Warehouse, that was one that we had. Game Crazy, oh my god, I remember Game Crazy. I always loved how the store, like the entire store looked green. You could rent games there and stuff, but they had like all of this like green imagery on the store. It felt very like original Xbox-esque, which was very much the American aesthetic, the American cultural paradigm. But I remember playing these games at a very, very young age and being just fascinated by them. When I was about 4 or 5, the Dreamcast broke. It turned out that, we opened it up, turned out that there was milk in it or something like that. I didn't spill anything in it. That was what was so confusing about it. I remember crying at the time because the Dreamcast had stopped working, because at that point, it was one of my favorite things. And at this point, the memory of it breaking isn't so vivid. A lot of this has been described to me about how I reacted. I can only remember select images of sitting on the floor and my dad taking it apart. But those moments of watching my brother talk into this little mechanical microphone sticking out of the Dreamcast controller, talking to the fish, the seaman, and having real conversations with him was probably one of the most influential things in terms of how I view and consume art ever. Because that was a very real parasocial experience, not in a YouTube context, but in a video game one. Oh, not even parasocial. It was basically just social, but with AI. Like, the amount of different things that you could tell the seaman, the fish, was incredible for not just technology, but for the time. That game was made in what, 2000, 1999. The fact that you were able to speak to this fish and talk about so many different concepts, have such a wide array of responses, and the fact that as you get to know him, he reacts to you differently and he sees you differently. You have to use the function of the clock in the Dreamcast to visit the fish every day, feed him and speak to him in order to make him happy. And you can either get the good or bad ending. Your fish can die if you don't take care of him every day, or You can end up with the really, I don't want to spoil the ending, but the really very emotional ending. Um, which was pretty amazing, the fact that they could have an emotional ending for the game. But you really do connect with the fish over the year or so that you spend just speaking to it every day through the microphone, feeding it, playing with it. It's incredible to me that that level of complexity was allowed in technology at the time. The fact that they were willing to experiment with such a bold and insane idea like that, um, it really was an amazing experience, especially at such a young age that to this day it's on my 3 by 3. It's a game that I will never forget. And when I tried replaying it in 2017, I want to say, it still held up. Might even have been 2016 that I played it, but it still held up as a game, and I was still thoroughly impressed by the technology that it presented. Um, and an experience like that, where you're seeing something truly unique, truly different at such a young age, and you're never really able to see something that's the same, I think it has an effect on how you view media, because I never did forget that game. Especially not, when me and my dad would talk about it, because my dad was really into the game, and he had like this deep analysis that he gave of it, where he was talking about like, how emotional the ending was and how cool the game was. And, when I listened to him talk about it, it also made me really excited as well, because it felt like we had something we could connect over. And with Sonic Adventure, I don't really remember it too well, or at least my memories of it at the time. I just thought it was a really cool game. Um, with Worms, what would happen is me, my brother, and my mom would all play Worms together. And we would do these death matches. We would have three Sega Dreamcast controllers plugged in. And I was never very good at Worms. I knew all the commands, I knew how to play it, but obviously because I was pretty young, I was never very good at it. When I was about 4 years old, I got better at the game, and I was still just as excited to play it back then. Um, but when I played Halo on the original Xbox, it was a really fundamental experience for me, because I was 3 years old at the time, and I remember seeing the game played quite a bit by my brother, and he was a big fan of it, obviously, because it was 2005. And of course, people are big fans of Halo in 2005 and Halo 2 and stuff. Um, but Combat Evolved, that game holds a really special place in my heart, even though, like, it isn't as good as the later games. It has some very obvious flaws. It shows its age at certain points. But the sheer amount of nostalgia that I feel for that game, walking through those tunnels where the Flood start infesting these space age buildings that, Master Chief has to go in, and he has to go into these deep, dark levels and fight against the Flood and blow things up. And, the levels at times could be really massive. You really had to explore through, and even though it was a first person shooter, there was an element of fear in it for me, because I wasn't good at the game enough to get to the parts where you fought the Flood when I was 3. Obviously, I just kind of dicked around with the controller and shot at my teammates, shot at enemies and stuff. But I never got very far. I think I got past like the second level. I wasn't good at it. My coordination was absolutely horrible, and the controller was way too big for my hands as well. They actually had to buy a smaller third party controller that was meant for people with small hands, and that's what I played the PS2 with. And I think it had functionality for the Xbox as well. But um, I remember turning on this game, and I had to beg my mom to play it, because she didn't want me to play something so violent at such a young age. Eventually, I was allowed to, and we had this ginormous 16 by 9 Sony Trinitron, which was like an $1,000 TV. That it was a very expensive TV. It was bought in the year 2000. Um, before I was born, 2 years before I was born, but it was bought as a housewarming gift, when my mom and my dad had been getting married. And I believe this was around the point that my mom got her Social Security disability check. So, when you get on Social Security, they give you about $12,000, I believe, in order to accommodate you for the 12 months in which you had been waiting for your Social Security. Sometimes it's like $15,000, depending on how long you worked, you're going to get more benefits. Um, and so, because my mom has epilepsy, they had this long court case to get her on the benefits. She had worked for quite some time, so she got more money than other people would have. And her lawyer and everything had fought for it. And in the process of waiting for the court to approve everything, it took about a year, which is pretty standard for disability cases. And she got $12,000, $13,000, and then $1,000 a month from that. She still gets that money, but she got all this money from the government in order to accommodate for the time in which she had been waiting to get it, going through the court approval process. You have to spend 1 year disabled before they can give you anything. And so with that money, they got this ginormous 16 by 9 Sony Trinitron TV. So really like a behemoth of a television, 1080i. It's a CRT. It is flat screened, but on the back, it had HDMI back when HDMI was just being experimented with, back when, way before it was a big deal like it is now, a standard. And, it obviously had component inputs and stuff. And so it was a really advanced TV for the time. I still remember 720p looked immaculate, incredible on that thing. And we had it up and running for quite some time. It was really a behemoth, a monolith of a television. And so getting to play Halo, the original Halo, at 3 years old on this ginormous television, a television bigger than I was at the time, being able to sit so close to it and just seeing the colors, the overt violence, and the space age world of this video game was really amazing to me. It blew my socks off. I had to stand up just to play it so I could see the TV properly. So I was standing there up with the controller in my hands. My brother would make some kind of snide remark or something. I really don't remember what he said. I just remember my mom complaining about the violence, but she let me play it anyway, so it didn't matter. Um, but it really was a step up from the TV in my brother's room, because those were like smaller CRTs. And so seeing this game displayed on this ginormous television was something I don't think I can ever forget. Um, we go to 4 years old. I start being able, my functional capacities are growing at this point. So, my motor skills, they're improving by this age because my brain was developing. And I was able to play more advanced games. And at this point, I got really, really into the Ratchet and Clank series. Been playing it shortly, a little bit when I was 3, but I don't really have many memories of that. I can just kind of go off what people told me happened, so I don't really remember. But Ratchet and Clank, man, I really loved the little robot Clank. He's a good boy. I didn't understand the comedy in the game, but I wanted to. I really loved the platforming element, just how unique the world was, how you could, whenever you broke something and hit an enemy, you would get these gears, and so the gears would start flying up from wherever it was you hit them, and it always felt super, super rewarding. I feel pretty similar about the Lego games, actually, which I'll get to when we start getting to 2000, further down in 2006, which is, the year I was 4 years old. Um, but I really loved seeing these collections of things that could occur as you continued to break enemies down, break things down, to just collect more stuff. There was something deeply moving and cathartic about spending time in this world and progressing in order to gain more items, collect more items, and I thought that was really special. And so I loved the game, absolutely loved it. I would always ask my parents whenever I could play it, because the PS2 was out in the living room, obviously. So I had to ask, whenever I could play it. And usually, Because at this point my dad was unemployed, I think. I don't think he was still working at the same place anymore by that point. So either him or my brother would be playing, and so it was rare that I ever got to. And so when I did, I really cherished the experience. It was very special. Um, no, it wasn't like I had a game console in my room at this point because the Dreamcast had broke and I just had the VCR in there. I would just watch the same movies over and over again. Um, or play with my stuffed animals and stuff. I do these like really fucking like in-depth stories with my stuffed animals. Like I would be playing like all kinds of like fiction imaginary games in my room, just like going insane with the amount of detail that I would put into these things that I would do with my toys. But anyway, so Ratchet and Clank was really fucking cool. I really loved Star Wars Battlefront at this time, especially Battlefront 2. Thought that game was really cool. I wasn't super good at it. I just liked playing the multiplayer with my brother. I What was the other game? There was this game where like you play as a mosquito. I can't even remember the name of it. That's how long it's been. But you play as this mosquito and you have to infect people. And it was really weird. I think it was like a Japanese type game, but you just fly the mosquito into people's rooms and like I remember it was a little weird for me to play at the time because I think there's like a raunchy scene where like a woman has a bra and it's like, ooh, what is that? Um, but there was another game I was really into called Katamari Damacy. Now this one is kind of popular in like obscure like Japanese game circles. Is that it's pretty reviled. Everyone is like, "Whoa, Katamari Damacy, so unique and cool." I certainly felt the same way. I really really loved the game because the whole game is just you exploring. You're constantly collecting more items to make the ball that you roll on bigger, and so the challenge is to just collect all this stuff and make it bigger. But the fun thing about it really was to explore the world. It felt like I was this tiny guy exploring a world of toys and fantasy and all this great stuff. And I really liked Mr. Mosquito. That was the name of it, Mr. Mosquito. Oh my God. Okay. So Mr. Mosquito, this game, that was a Freudian slip right there. The moment that I mentioned being in a small space where you have to fly around, I remember the name. It's fantastic. But this game, Mr. Mosquito, is that what I really loved about it was that you quite literally were super small. You just flew around and stung people. Um, and so let me see here. What is the next game? There was another game that I really liked at this time. Um, what the fuck was it called? It was this like spaceship game where you're basically an astronaut. And I didn't play this. I watched my dad play it. But I believe it was by the same people who made Kingsfield and Dark Souls, I want to say. I don't remember, but it was this basically this astronaut game where you would walk around and there was this teddy bear and you had to you had to grab the teddy bears. There was this little girl and it was really atmospheric, and this astronaut guy has to like not get killed by the little girl. I really don't remember how it worked, but like you had no weapon in the game, and that's what I thought was really unique about it. I didn't play it because it was a rated M game, and I guess it was too weird for me to play at the time. I was allowed to play Halo, but whatever. Um, it was too complicated, most likely. Um, but in 2005, oh shit, I didn't even mention the GameCube. The GameCube was a really big deal in my house as well. We sold all of our main series Nintendo games because we had Mario Kart Double Dash, we had a few of the Mario Party games, we had Smash Bros. And ultimately those games got sold to buy other games, or maybe it was to buy food or something. I really don't know. They got sold for some reason, but I still remember when I was very, very young playing Mario Party with my mom, my dad, and my brother. And that was a four-player game, that's all controllers being used. And that was really cool. I still remember that being a lot of fun. To this day, I haven't played those games since then, so it's quite literally been what 12 years, 11 years, something like that. Um, as I'm 17 now, so no, that would have been yeah, that would have been 14 or 13 years. Um, and so yeah, it's been a long time since I played those. The closest thing I did was I played the original Mario Party on a Nintendo 64 emulator like 4 years ago. That's the closest thing I did. And that was on an Android tablet nonetheless. I still remember trying to play Mario 64 on an Android tablet. That was a nightmare. But I really liked this game called 13 on the GameCube. Now, by the time I'm gonna skip being 5 years old, and I'm gonna go straight up to 6 years old because I want to explain the GameCube for a little bit. So when I was 6 years old, I was really, really into this shooting game called 13. It had a comic book art style, and it's probably one of the best. Like it's in my 3x3 of my top 9 games ever, but it's probably one of the best first-person shooters ever made because the shooting is extremely cathartic. The story is very, very dense. I've played this game like 15 times. I've played through it so many times. I love it a lot. But it was based off a comic book. The entire game is cell shaded, and so when you shoot someone, it'll do this like cinematic scene thing where when you shoot them, it'll show like the comic page or the comic panel like coming out, and then it'll show like whoosh, and all this other stuff. And so, like while you're playing the game, like you're interacting with comic book panels. I don't know how to explain it. Like the cinematics are playing while you're playing the gameplay, and it creates this really interesting atmosphere. And I've never played a game that's like it stylistically speaking. I've played games with comic book aesthetics that have the panels and stuff. I've played cell shaded games, but this one, the cinematic style of it was never topped. There was a lot of great guns. The story had a lot of mystery and intrigue. It was a really well written drama. Voice actors were great, especially the black girl. I can't even remember her name at this point anymore, but she was like a really cool secret agent. Um, and The ending ended on a cliffhanger. I remember I beat the game when I was 7 or 8, because I had been playing it for quite some time. But when I was about 7 or 8 years old, by this point I had the GameCube in my room. So when we bought our Xbox 360, I just had the GameCube in my room and I could play on it. And so I had beaten the game by this point, and I remember being fucking floored by that ending because there was no sequel to the game. Now, there was a TV series for 13, which aired on a really weird, obscure TV channel called Reels. I don't know if anyone remembers the Reels network. It was kind of like if Sci-Fi had a bunch of like Pawn Star-esque shows put on them, where people are going out and like doing reality TV stuff. But they had like one or two dramas that were played at a very specific block on about Friday or Thursday, something like that. And 13 was one of the shows that aired based off the comic book, not the game. And it kind of fleshed out the story more, but what I was really hoping was that the story would continue to the extent that the game did, and it would go further than that enough to finish the cliffhanger. Unfortunately, the TV network I don't think is around anymore, and the TV show got canceled. And so, unfortunately, never got to see what happened on that boat. Don't want to spoil anything, but the end of the game really made me upset because there was never a sequel. And to this day it still kind of upsets me. I should just read the comic book, but I want to experience the rest of the story in like TV or game form. That's the thing. Um List of things to do before I die. Read the 13 comic book. But no, I would play this game called True Crime, Streets of LA, not Streets of New York. I haven't played that one. That's the one with Snoop Dogg in it. But Streets of LA was really cool. It was basically like if Grand Theft Auto was on the GameCube. It was pretty much what it was. It was just Grand Theft Auto but playing as a cop. So you played as a cop, you could do good or bad cop. The world wasn't as big, but they still had to put it on 2 discs. It was one of the few GameCube games that had progressive scan, so I remember if we plugged it up to the bigger TV in the living room, the graphics could look quite good, it would go up to 480p and widescreen 16:9 and all that. But the game itself, I would have to sneak the game. So when my brother was asleep, and my parents were asleep, I would sneak the game into my room, and what I would do was I would put a blanket around the television, and I would constantly be adjusting the volume to make the volume as low as possible. And as gunshots and stuff happened, I would turn it down more or just turn it down completely. And so I would be super, super close to the TV trying to hear as much as I could. And I felt really dirty about playing this game. Like it was something I was not supposed to do, but I did not care because I wanted the Grand Theft Auto experience, and I knew that was like the only game that I could do that with. And so I played it a few times, but I always ended up playing for like 30 minutes and then quitting because I wanted to, not get caught for having done it. Um, Turok Evolution was a game that I was really into as well, another first person shooter. Never got very far into it as I played I always got to like the third level and I would die because it was too hard. I think the furthest I got was when I was about 8. Was I got to the level where you're flying the pterodactyl and you have to shoot stuff down and stuff, where you exit the first person view and you're like flying stuff around the level. Really fun game. Very well made. I wish the Turok series was still around. I had a lot of fun playing the Nintendo 64 games when I got my Nintendo 64 in 2010, 2011, something like that. Um, but uh, but yeah, so um, in about 2005, or wait no, it's 2006. 2006, um, I can't do math. I have dyscalculia, by the way, so I have trouble doing math. How old was I? I was 5, or wait, no, I was 5 in 2007, so I was 4 in 2006. Did I miss a number? I have dyscalculia. I'm really bad at numbers, but uh, let's see, where was I going with that? In 2007, by that point, we still had the PS2, but it was sold shortly after. Like I think the last coherent memory I have of actually using the PS2 was when the movie Open Season came out. Is that we had moved the PS2 into my room so I could watch Open Season because we rented it from this store called Hastings, and so we would always rent movies from there. And I got a copy of Open Season for about 7 days. I think you had to pay $7 to do that, normally on rentals. And so we got this movie, and I was a really big fan of Open Season at the time. Big fan of the movie. And I just watched it over and over and over and over again on PS2. And shortly after, in 2007, the PS2 actually got sold. Now, at this point, we had like 200 games. We had an insane amount of PS2 games because my dad would just get them for cheap. He would do the Games for Cheap Bastards sale, which was something that they advertised on a television show called X Play. On X Play, they would advertise this program where you could get games for very, very cheap. And a lot of the time, it was like PS2 and original Xbox stuff. And so he would get these Games for Cheap Bastards sales at Game Crazy, which I talked about earlier, and he would just get really cheap stuff because of that. Or Hastings, they were selling their rental stock, and because a game had been rented out more often, they would tend to cost less, rather than just a normal used game. A normal used game would cost more than a game that had been rented out a bunch of times. I guess because of scratches or something, but they worked fine. And so, we got a lot of games that way for really cheap prices. So at this point, we had amassed a ginormous collection, but we did not have the money to buy a Xbox 360 or a PS3, and those were the new consoles at the time. And so, at this point, we had sold all of the PS2 stuff, and I still remember the day in which my dad had packed up all of the PS2 games, all of them, and I was simply thinking about how I didn't get to play so many of those because I wasn't old enough yet. And then I was thinking about how Star Wars Battlefront, Battlefront 2, these games that were fundamentally important to me, that I cared a lot about, were just being packed away. Ratchet and Clank, my favorite game, Ratchet and Clank, was being packed away. And I just cried. I cried and cried and cried as this was happening, as all of these, this bookshelf of games was being put into these boxes. The console had already been stored away at this point. all of it was ready to, I believe, go to Hastings or GameStop to be sold off in order to have the money to buy an Xbox 360. And I I still remember vividly crying and crying and then saying, what about Star Wars Battlefront? Where is it going to go? And my dad said, "Well, we can get it on the Xbox when we get the Xbox 360." And we never got an Xbox copy of it, but he would say things like that to try and reassure me that it was going to be fine and that I wasn't going to miss the system too much. We're going into a new generation and stuff. But I was so sad. I just kept crying and crying. It kind of reminds me of when the Dreamcast broke, is that I felt similar, but like that visceral emotion wasn't there because I was too young. When the Dreamcast broke, I was a year younger, 2 years younger, something like that. I'm losing track of time here, kind of losing track of the timeline, but um, I was pretty young, and so I did cry, but I didn't feel, or at least I don't remember feeling that visceral, like gut just had been punched level of emotion that I had felt when the PS2 had been sold. To this day, I cannot forget that vivid image in my head of all those games being packed away and me just tearing and tearing and tearing. Um, it made me really sad. And, I've been collecting a lot for the PS2 lately when I have money, and I can say with complete confidence that it's my favorite console of all time. If you're gonna cry over a game console, I mean, that one is a great one to cry over, but it was really weird because I think it just shows how obsessed I was with video games at that point. I had started playing when I was 2, and by the time I was 5, and even more so at the age of 6, I was full throttle, like obsessed with video games. Video games were my life, and for the next I want to say for the next like 7 years, it was still true. Video games remained my life for a very, very long time. And even to an extent now, it's still true. It's just in a different form. I can't I can't collect physical stuff as much, but I try to. Um, and so we get to, we get to 6 years old. And, by this point, the old Xbox is in my room. GameCube is in my room. By 7, yeah, pretty much all of that stuff's in there. And, I just played all of those games that we had again and again. Really into Halo 2, really into. I don't think. I wasn't allowed to play the Suda51 game, Killer 7. I wanted to. I would watch my brother play it, but I was never allowed to play Killer 7. Didn't play that until I was like 10 or 11. But I was really, really into the games that we had. And I remember when I was about 8 or 9. Actually, no, 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 no. I forgot. I completely forgot getting Psychonauts. Psychonauts for Christmas in 2005. Oh my god, how could I have forgotten that? Psychonauts, my favorite game of all time. Okay, so I got Psychonauts for Christmas 2005 because we had rented the game prior and I liked it a lot. Um, but I really really loved the game at the time. Didn't understand the story too well, but that didn't really matter. The story was something I just kind of grasped as I continued platforming through it. I think I only really understood the story when I was about 8, and I believe I beat the game at 8 years old because I remember getting to the final boss, the meat grinder guy, who's really fucking difficult, and I spent like an entire day just fighting that boss again and again. I had way more patience back then than I do now, and way more free time, and so I just kept fighting the final boss in Psychonauts, which for some I remember Digi talked about how he couldn't beat the final boss, and I was like, bro, I beat that guy when I was 8 years old, but I just kept fighting this boss again and again and again until eventually I beat him. And I remember it was probably the most satisfying moment in my gaming hobby, ever. That was the defining moment for me as a gamer, or one of them at least, where I beat that boss. And I remember the feeling of catharsis and just sheer, I did it, I beat the boss. And I remember seeing the ending, and the ending was fucking awesome. It really tied up the story in a great bow. Psychonauts is an amazing game, but I had played it in Christmas 2005 because um, I thought I thought the game was really cool. I just didn't know how to play it because I was too young to really grasp what it was at the time. And then as I got older and I played it more and more, and I understood the story more as I got older, and I got past more levels and I got better at the game. The emotions really set in for me. That's a game that can still make me viscerally emotional if I play it at the right time. Fucking amazing game. The greatest game of all time. If you want to play a great single player story experience with with really dynamic levels that have a lot of density, and where the story and the game meld really well, where like you're feeling like you're learning more about the story as you explore the world, play Psychonauts. Amazing platformer, revolutionary shit right there. But that game instantly became my favorite game when I was about 7 years old, playing through it. And I mean, still to this day, it's my favorite game. It's for the last 10 years. For the last 10 years, that game has been my favorite. It's pretty amazing. I wonder how I'll feel about it in, the next 10 years. But, it pretty much went the same from then on. Like if you go up to like 9 years old, it's basically just the same process. Me playing on my Xbox and my GameCube. I would go into the living room and play on the PS3 or the Xbox 360. I still remember in 2007 when Fallout 3 came out, my brother and my dad were just straight up obsessed with that game, and I played it in about 2008-ish when they thought I was okay to play it, when they thought I could. And I really loved Fallout 3 at the time. That was like an obsession of mine, was Fallout 3 in 2008. Um, and I know I had played the Gears of War games a little bit. I really liked Halo 3 a lot. Halo 3, obviously, the logical extension of the other games. I thought that was amazing. I still remember this moment, the first time that I played Halo 3. There were these big, I forget what they're called at this point, but these big alien characters. And if you shot one of them and the other guy was next to the other, I remember this beast. He just shouted out, "That was my brother," and I thought that was so cool as a kid because my dad and my brother remarked on it, and they go, "Whoa, this is the future of gaming." The AI can react if you kill a character who's near you. Wow, it's so cool. And I thought the same thing when I was that age. I was like, "Whoa, how did it do that?" It's like responding to me the way Seaman did, and I thought that was really cool. And blown away by the graphics of the Xbox 360, blown away by all the games that were coming out. Same with the PS3, really. Like, I remember playing a little bit of MGS4 when we bought our PS3 in 2008, or maybe it was 2009. No, I don't think it was 2009. I think it was 2008. Pretty early into 2008 nonetheless, but I remember, playing a little bit of Metal Gear Solid 4, and I didn't really understand how it worked. I would just watch my dad play it most of the time, because he was a big fan of that game, and I thought that game was really cool. Um, but I was just surrounded by video games my entire life. That's kind of the point I'm getting to here, is that it was always around. And I didn't really have very much interest in educational games for kids that were my age. I always felt that like a lot of educational games were very condescending. We had an E-machine, a really like old Windows ME computer, and we put XP on it. Didn't work very well, so when we installed Windows ME, it would work faster. But the E-machine, it was we had like a lot of educational and school software because I was homeschooled for basically almost my entire life. I've been homeschooled. And so I would try to play these educational games, hated them, thought they were really condescending. The only like quote unquote educational games that I liked were the Spy Fox series. I don't think those are educational, they're just kind of point and click games. I had these SpongeBob point and click games that I liked a lot, but in general I wasn't like a computer guy. I always thought the stuff we had for the computer paled in comparison to the console games. Really, really loved the console games. And I was like obsessed with the M rating. I used to be really autistic about categorizing games into ratings. I don't know why, but there was like for like 10 years of my life, I really was just fascinated by ratings for video games. I would read on the back of the box all the content that the game had, and I was just so obsessed with how games were rated, like M, T, E. I don't know why. Like, I don't know why something as strange as a parental warning would be so fascinating to me as a kid. But I don't know. I was just obsessed with how these games could be categorized into different ratings. But my phone is at about 2%, so I guess I should just briefly remark on, and this is the part of the story I've talked about in other videos, is that around 2010, 2011, I started getting into the GameFAQs forums. Initially because I found out about JJ Games on a totally random this video game buying website. And so I found out about the NES and all these old consoles and stuff, and I got really, really interested in older retro games. And so on the GameFAQs forums, I would read the GameFAQs forums every single day on my mom's laptop. When we put the e-machine back in my room, I would read GameFAQs a lot on my computer, which was great because I never really had much of a personal internet thing. Like I never really had internet in my room, so being able to use the fucking Internet Explorer thing on Windows ME to read GameFAQs was very fun. But I would read GameFAQs every single day for like 4 or 5 hours a day. I would read GameFAQs. I would go to YouTube and I would watch people's collection videos. I would watch like this weird punk rocker guy talk about his Nintendo 64 collection. I would look at like footage of people playing games, like recording their camera, recording their screen. Um, and I loved reading the GameFAQs forums. It was one of my favorite pastimes. I would just do it for hours and hours every single day, from about, I want to say, age 8 to age 14. I did that. So for 6 years, I was reading the GameFAQs forums pretty obsessively. Um, and I got really into learning about retro consoles. I think I think I was 9 or 10 when I got the Nintendo 64. I went to a pawn shop. I had been spending several months saving up change, so I had tons of pennies and quarters and stuff, and I bought a Nintendo 64 at the pawn shop. I got like a PlayStation 1 for $1 later on at a garage sale. I got a Sega Genesis at another garage sale for like 20 bucks. I was really into playing the original Sonic and stuff, but my camera is at 1% battery, so I'll have to continue this story in another video.